Outages suck. Show of hands. Who agrees with this statement? Nice, nice. How about this one? Outages rule. Anyone? Okay, my people. Nice. So I agree more with this statement than I do the first one. And hi, I'm Nida. I'm a site reliability engineer at Microsoft, previously at Google. And I'm here today to tell you why I love outages, and maybe you should too. So I've been working for over a decade now as an SRE, and I actually credit my last promotion to an outage. So this is the story of how Nida broke something and netted a promotion. So it was a couple of years ago. I was working on a very large engineering team, and we were rolling out a very large rewrite of our web serving system. And part of that rewrite including a naming scheme change, which affected the load balancer configuration. So being the pedant and forward-thinking individual that I am, I insisted that we make this load balancing configuration change as soon as possible, while we were still canarying in only one data center. So I even volunteered to make the change. So I thought it would be a simple change. Everyone else on my team thought it would be a simple change. And we were all very terribly, catastrophically wrong. So I went about this change as I usually do. I drew up a plan, I got it reviewed by a bunch of people on my team, I pre-prepped the changes and all, and I negotiated time with the on-call for when I'm going to do this. So I decided on a Thursday, I put the change in effect, and I watched a bunch of graphs for the next couple of hours. Traffic levels seemed fine, there was nothing anomalous going on, error rates weren't fluctuating, error rates were fine, none of our alerts were firing, everything looks totally normal. So I declared the change a success, and I went home for the weekend, because of course I took Friday off. And I didn't check my work email again until Monday morning. So it wasn't really until Monday that I found out what a terrible time my sister team had had across the globe the previous Friday. So what happened was, there was this really unfortunate confluence of configuration changes, including my own, which tickled this latent nasty bug in the serving system, and the end result was that our Canary data center was completely swamped with traffic and couldn't serve any of it. It was completely overloaded. We burned through 1/3 of our failure budget for the entire quarter in that first week of the quarter. Oops. That was bad. But after that change, the things that happened weren't so bad. They were actually really good. I spent the next 5 months ripping through our entire stack, top to bottom, figuring out every single dependency on that naming scheme and re-architecting the entire system so that it would work. That took 5 months of my effort. And when I wrote up the details of my work for when I went up for promotion, the very first thing I cited was the postmortem for this outage, because it was such a succinct and such a great argument for everything I wanted to demonstrate. It demonstrated the impact of my work, how complex it was, how delicate it was, and very viscerally, it demonstrated the cost of getting it wrong, which I didn't, by the way. I didn't cause any more outages then. But I wasn't the only one who benefited from this. My entire team did. Our entire architecture did. I improved it in one way. My entire team learned from this outage in other ways, and we improved our stack. We advocated for the changes we needed based on this outage, based on this postmortem. So basically, postmortems are essentially a tidy little argument for change. honestly, there's no more powerful argument for change than, shit was just on fire, So I would like more people to see outages and the ensuing postmortems as the opportunity for change and the wealth of information that they actually represent to me, and which they represent generally. I just want more people to believe that. So let's talk about postmortems. What's in them? I think most people here would know what's generally in a postmortem. A postmortem is a document you would write up after, and the analysis you would do after an outage in your system, where you write up everything that happened, what the impact was, what went wrong, and so on, and what action items you're going to take as a result. So there's a lot of templates available online for what should go into a postmortem and how you should write it. And they're all really good, but there's some essential parts that I think are important to have. You want an impact assessment, a timeline, analysis of the contributing factors, and you want your repair items or action items. There's lots of words for that, your follow-ups. An impact assessment, a really good one, is going to be very customer and user focused. It's going to describe and frame your outage in terms of how it affected your bottom line and how it affected your customers and how it ties into your SLA, for example, the things you care about. The timeline is just like a sequence of events that happened, what people did and when, what the system did and when, what broke and when. And the analysis of contributing factors is the more complicated work of digging into what made this terrible thing happen and what made it more terrible and what made it last longer and that sort of things. And your repair items are your follow-ups, the things you want to do, the things you want to change to make sure that your system is more resilient in the future in face of outages. That either you don't repeat the outage, or if it does recur, that you can mitigate the impact of it on your customers, on your bottom line. So, just the fact that you're writing a postmortem in and of itself gives you a bit of information already. So not all outages necessarily warrant a postmortem. We don't write a postmortem for every single tiny thing that went wrong. We make a judgment call that this was something that you and your users care about, and it broke. And this value judgment is what you make when you write a postmortem. This is why I'm writing a postmortem, because I care about this. And along with that, there's lots more information. Something that your users were expecting your system to be able to do and handle didn't work. So there's 2 bits of information just in this statement as well. One, you have a model of what your users do in the real world. Now, not a model, you have an example. You know exactly, this is a real world scenario. This is really how your users interact with your system. This is actual user behavior. On top of that, you also have the fact that your system cannot handle this actual user behavior. So outages direct attention to parts of your system that need that attention. In this case, this is something that your users expect your system to be able to do, and it's broke, it don't work. So pinpointing areas such as this is one of the most powerful aspects of postmortems. You pinpoint areas that need your attention. So there's not just these bits of information. Another third aspect of the same part is that this is a demonstration of how your system actually behaves in the real world. It's not a prediction. It's not a model. It is an actual case study of how your users interact with your system and how your system responds. And this is really valuable, hard data. So your outage demonstrates what needs changing in your system. And your postmortem captures this information. So not only is a postmortem an argument for change, it is an argument for specific directed change. It tells you what needs your focus and what needs your attention. So another really awesome bit of information that you get out of an outage, or actually out of the postmortem, is the impact assessments and the numbers it gives you. A good impact assessment, like I said before, will frame your outage in terms of how it affected your users, how it affected your bottom line. It'll frame it in terms of the things you care about on a business level, on a product level, on a project level. And not only will it have that framing, it'll also put that framing into hard numbers. Like we're at a monitoring conference. We all like numbers. We all like metrics. And your impact assessment, if you do it right, will have really nice metrics, hard numbers, the kinds of things that management and stakeholders like looking at. Like you can say it will quantify the cost of your outage in terms of these are how many request fails, these are how many transactions were attempted and didn't complete. This is the bottom line dollar cost of having this outage. You are quantifying the cost of the failure that occurred. So not only are postmortems an argument for change and an argument for specific change, they are a data-driven argument for specific change. And we all love being data-driven. So one of the great things about outages is that they're a compelling argument for change. And they're a compelling demonstration of what needs changing. And they even come with their own stats of like what it would cost you if you do not make changes. And this is all really, really useful data. And it would be an enormous pity to let it go to waste, especially since it cost you an outage to get that data. So I've been talking about how postmortems are an argument for change, but let's talk more about what that change is. So the things I listed before that should be in a postmortem, the impact assessment, the timeline, the analysis of contributing factors, these are all essentially just data collection. This is information that exists in the real world. You're just pulling it together and collating it and putting it into a comprehensible format for your postmortem. This information is what enables you to come up with the change you want in the form of your repair items or your action items or your follow-ups. And your repair items, is where you get to put in your input. This is where you get to impact the future of your product. This is how you can affect change in your product. This is how you can impact its future design. This is possibly an opportunity for you to revisit prior design decisions that possibly you weren't even a part of at the time, or you can revisit them with even more hard data and hindsight and make even better decisions. You can use this valuable new information now at your disposal to make your future system much, much better, much, much more resilient. But since you can affect change through your repair items, let's talk about repair items in a little more detail. I own the postmortem review process for my team, my current team, and I found that generally the owner and the writer, the person who writes up the postmortem, is the person who was on call at the time, because they're generally the incident manager for that particular outage. And I found that most people are great at data collection parts of the postmortem, writing down the timeline and even the analysis and doing that in a lot of depth and making sure the impact is correctly collated, correctly recorded. Data collection, if your postmortem template guides you through this process, it's not that hard and people are really good at it. One thing that in the review process I find that I have the most impact is helping people coming up with really good repair items. I try to encourage people and guide people to think more broadly, more holistically, and more adventurously about what changes they want to see in the future of our system, such that it's more resilient. So there's a few different techniques you can use to work with repair items and guide thinking. So they're very generic, they're pretty simple, and I'd like to share them with you. I find it's actually really useful to categorize your repair items by what you're targeting with them. Are you targeting detection of a problem, mitigation of an issue such that users will not be affected by it anymore, or you stop the bleeding essentially, or are you targeting underlying fixes for what went wrong in your system? This categorization, it comes up a lot. It's come up a lot in my experience. Even if you don't explicitly acknowledge your repair items as falling into these categories. So I used to work on dedicated SRE teams, very large ones, where you were somewhat separated from the developer teams that worked on the same product. And now I'm actually an SRE and doing SRE work while embedded in a primarily developer team. And I found that SRE teams and developer teams tend to have different focuses when coming up with repair items. SRE focus tends to be on detection and mitigation items, while developer focus is very often on fix items. So this is completely natural. This is a product of what we know. This is a product of what we control. And it's actually an advantage, because when you know and control something, you feel empowered to come up with ways to change it, to make it better. So it's really useful to involve people from across your project team in your postmortem brainstorming sessions for repair items, because you really want to cover all your bases. And you want to take advantage of the different focus that people have, and you don't want to limit yourself to just a few of them. Another way the categorization actually comes in really handy is with, at least for detection and mitigation, a really great tool that I know of is to focus on your timeline. Like I said before, timeline is an essential part of a postmortem. And I encourage you to make your timeline as detailed as possible. The more detail you have, the better, because it'll really help you target areas for improvement with more surgical precision. But at the very minimum, I would encourage you to have in your timeline the time, the impact start time, the time to detect there was an issue, the time to mitigate the problem such that users were no longer seeing an issue, and the time for you to engage the correct people to make sure that the mitigation actually happened, like the engineering team involved, or like your vendors, or whoever's in this position. And the reason why you can do this is because time to detect, or time to engage, or time to mitigate, these numbers, if you keep track of them, they're a very good way to focus your attention on what needs attention. If you drive down the amount of time you spend on any one of these parts of your timeline, you're driving down the overall impact duration of your entire outage. So if you have a very high time to detect, for example, you could ask yourself these sorts of questions. Did you actually automatically detect that there was an issue, or did you find out something was wrong because users or customers told you? And do you want to live with that? Like customers telling you that there's something wrong with your system. Do you need to expand? Do you have a gap in your alerting coverage? Do you need to expand your coverage? Do you need new alerts? Or if you had alerts and they did go off, did they go off in time? Did they go off at the right moment? Do you actually have enough time to mitigate the issue without, could you have mitigated it faster if you had been alerted faster? So do you need to adjust thresholds? Also, did you actually alert on the right things? If a giant outage happened and you didn't get alerted at all, but you did have alerts that you were expecting to tell you something was wrong, are they the right things to alert on? Do they actually cover the right metrics? Do they have the right thresholds? So this way you can drive down time to detect. So if you have a very high time to engage, you can ask yourself more meta questions around your processes. Like, are your communication processes sufficient in case of an outage? Do you have an incident management response way of doing things, a process for that? And did it actually work in this situation, or did it break down? Did it help you? And on top of that, there's also the tech you use for your communication. Did that help you, or did that hinder you? Were you using asynchronous communications, such as email, for example, and people didn't see them? Are you using SMSs, which are more synchronous, I guess? But did your carrier not deliver the SMS within a reasonable amount of time, or not deliver it at all? Are you using Slack, for example? Do you have notifications turned on? Do you have the right people in your communication system? Like, do they have the right contact information in there? Another question you can ask for time to engage is, did you have to reach out to some specific subset of people and get them engaged in order to mitigate this issue? And were they not available? Do you actually want to expand the pool of people who you need to engage or who you can engage to mitigate this sort of issue? If you have a very high time to mitigate, then your questions come around to more diagnostic stuff or the actual work that you do to fix an issue. Like, did you spend a very long time on your rollback? Is there no actual rollback procedure? Is it very manual? Did it turn out to be error-prone? Was it actually automated, but it didn't work this time because you didn't test it? And so you can also ask yourself, was it too time-consuming to diagnose the issue? So mitigation, we know like what the problems are, but was it really hard to figure out what actually went wrong? Do you have charts, graphs, insights, emails, machine learning, AI, anything that makes it easier to diagnose this issue or not? Or was it really hard? Did you not even have access to the information you needed? And another access issue is, were there specific people with the access that you needed? Were there single points of failure for implementing your mitigation measures? Like, do only certain people have access to certain systems? Do we need to expand this pool of people? Do certain people, only these certain people, do they act as single points of failure? And do they only, like, are they the only people who know certain information of how to mitigate? So asking yourself these questions, you can come up with the repair items for driving down your time to mitigate. So coming back to the categorization by target, for fixes, I don't have such a generic tool as a timeline. I found timelines to be super useful once I started using them. But for fixes, it's a little harder to come up with fixes because they tend to be very much infrastructure and technology dependent. But there are ways you could make this better. I mean, you can still ask yourself certain questions to unanchor yourself in a way. When you know a system really well, you tend to be anchored by the knowledge that you have. And one of the best ways to come up with really creative and very impactful repair items is to try to think outside of the box a little bit and ask yourself questions which broaden your scope, which are things you may not otherwise have thought of. And some of those really good questions would be like, my favorite is, why do we even do X? Why do we have X? Why do we have this button that takes down the entire system? I mean, we did that. Why do we wait for this response from a dependent system when we're not actually dependent on it and we can already serve a response to our upstream? So why do we even X is a great question, and more people should be asking it. So another thing, which ties into the fact that an outage is a case study of how people use your system practically, is that you should ask yourself, is there a use case that you entirely missed? Are people using your system in a way that you never predicted? And is this a use case you need to cover or you need to block off? And can user flows be changed so that when you have a failure, users don't actually see as much of an impact? Can you show partial results to users instead of no results, for example? That is a lessened impact on your customer. Can you do retries in the background when invisibly so that your users don't even see it happening? You can also ask yourself, for all the systems that were involved in this outage and were dependent on each other, do they actually have degraded modes to fall back into? This is especially useful if the outage happened because your prediction of exactly how much traffic you were going to get was wrong for some reason. It was too little. And you got way too much traffic. And what does your system do when it gets way too much traffic? Do you actually have degraded modes for all your subsystems to fall back into? And the same question or the same area can be asked for dependencies, external dependencies, internal dependencies, things you may not control. But you have expectations of these external systems. And are your expectations actually matching reality? And do you need to work around them? Or do you need to upgrade your contracts with these people? Or do you need to do something about it? So all of these are really good questions, which I think are more fundamental to how we do things. This is questioning how you architected your system in the first place. So it's not bug fixes. It's not go in and change this timeout, go in and change this call or whatever. This is actually like, why do we do things the way we do things? And how can we make it better? How can we make it match reality more? So these questions aren't exhaustive, but I think they put you in the right direction. And all these strategies and questions are tools. Tools to come up with the most effective repair items you can. And having these tools and employing them is really important because postmortems are a very powerful argument and a very hard-earned opportunity for change. And as John Allspaw said in his talk, milk this opportunity for everything it's worth. So, say it with me this time. Outages rule! I don't actually know if I have time for questions. Do I? Okay, no questions. Thank you, everyone.